I've got to say, of all the Sundays of preaching, I don't like Christ the King. I think it's to do with the Republican within me. Now, for those of you who might think that that's just an Australian thing, I was a Republican long before I came to this country. I was a Republican back in England. I find, and please, you don't have to agree with me here just because I'm at the pulpit. You certainly don't. But I look back and I think about this, and I find the whole thing about the king, and in our case the queen, being appointed by God to rule over people, and there being some kind of hierarchy of nobles that God has appointed over us, a nonsense. I think it is absolute and total rubbish. But that's my opinion. Doesn't mean I don't like the Queen. I think she's a very nice person, very hard-working person, and represents her country very well. Then I came to Australia, and there was a bigger movement that was away from royalty. And some of you who come from colonial countries will know that you've tried to shuffle off that colonial past. For those who are from Sri Lanka, you've tried to do that, haven't you? Because you used to be called Ceylon. From Sudan, I know they've tried to shuffle off some of that hierarchy that was above them. What's happened in Cambodia? You did that as well, didn't you? Sometimes it's had some consequences to do that, to get rid of the systems that rule us and to ask questions of that. In this country, we are still part of the monarchy, aren't we? We still have the Queen as a head of state. What in Tonga? You have your own king, don't you? And that's a very big deal, because I know that every time that there is a coronation over there, half the Uniting Church disappears, including your cousin Greg, who goes over and sees the king get crowned, or whatever they do to the kings over there, I presume crowning. So when it comes to terminology like Christ the King, I struggle with that a little bit personally. And that's my own thing. If you don't, that's okay. I am a scholar from the Gospel of Mark. That is where I've done a lot of my post-degree studies. And they have a very different title that Jesus uses for himself. It's not Christ the King. It is the Son of Man, or as recently translated, the human one. The Jesus who is like you and me. The Jesus who walked amongst us is the Gospel of Mark's view of the Jesus that we follow. The one who walks out in front of us and says, "Come follow me." But here in this Gospel, in John's Gospel, there's a different take. You read Matthew again, the whole idea of Jesus, the Messiah, the one who is anointed, and kings get anointed, is very much the theme. So I want you to realise that each of the Gospels has a very different view of who Jesus is and how they present Jesus. And I will say I'm totally biased as a Markian person on the whole view of the Son of Man. But here we are today. We are looking today at this thing called Christ the King. And we have this feast called Christ the King. Does anyone know how long we've been celebrating Christ the King for? Have a guess. Come on, be brave. You can only be wrong. And I know I'm not wrong because I've studied it. I've looked at it. We have feasts like Easter, don't we? Christmas is a feast. Christmas actually, do you know when Christmas actually started? It was about 300 years actually after the birth. And we appropriated one of the Roman holidays, a holiday called Saturnalius. So that was 300 years after Christ. Anyone care to have a guess at when we did Christ the King? It's really actually important in terms of understanding and actually giving us a message. You are such an unadventurous bunch today. Come on, Nathaniel. Any ideas? You've studied?
2,000 years ago.
2,000 years ago? That's a really good effort, but you're totally wrong. Okay, well, someone's been brave enough. You're not going to help me.
Long time ago.
Long time ago, someone said, no, you're wrong.
300
No, you can be wrong. This is a church where you can get things wrong. In fact, most churches, you should be able to get all things wrong, and God still loves you. You're right, but you know what it is? I will tell you. 1925. That seems pretty strange, doesn't it? Wasn't that long ago. I won't ask anyone to put their hand up if they were here in 1925. John's not here, so he can't. 1925. Within living memory of some people. That's not that long ago, is it? And it came from an encyclical from the Pope. Pope Innocent the 11th. I love the name Innocent the 11th. Sounds so good, doesn't it? Pope Innocent the 11th wrote an encyclical claiming that we should celebrate Christ the King. And that was in light of the fact that after the First World War, many people had come back from the war and they were losing their faith. Their morals had changed. Life was different after the Great War for many people in Western society. And I assume in some parts of the more far-flung empires where they were starting to question things. Also, at the same time, just down the road from where the Pope lives, do you know where the Pope lives? The Vatican. Yeah, just down the road from where he lives was a man called Mussolini. And he was running round, and he had a group of followers called the Black Shirts. And they invented a salute. It would start here and it would go out like that. And they would say, El Duce, El Duce. Meanwhile, in Germany at the same time, was another man called Adolf Hitler. And his team didn't wear black shirts, they wore brown shirts. You'd think all of the colours they could have worn brown, pretty yucky colour, but anyway, they wore brown. And they used the same salute, only they would just come straight up. And they would say, "Hey Hitler." And at the same time they were proclaiming that, I'll say it in English, that this Führer was my leader. So to counter some of what's going on down the road, the church, through the Catholics, started to say, we must actually stand for something different. Because the Nazis and the fascists of the time stood for a whole way of putting down other people because of their colour, because of their religion, because of their creed. And this was a total anathema to the church as it was standing there. So they started to say these words, Christ is my King. And there is a very famous man called Martin Niemöller, who you may or may not have heard of. He was a Baptist minister, a little later down the track in Germany, who said these words, that Christ is my Führer, not Hitler is my Führer. And for that, he had the dubious honour of being put into a concentration camp and locked up and being called Hitler's special person. And this started to equate more to me, to say that Christ is King when everything else seems to be contrary, when the world around seems to be going mad, to proclaim that we believe in someone who has a different value, who sees people as being valuable, who sees people as being meaningful, and was prepared to put their own life on the line, that we might have life. And as Jesus says, to have life in abundance. Something that's contrary. And I was thinking to all what is going on in the world that is around us today, where a week ago we heard about those horrific bombings in Paris, where we cannot turn our television on without hearing of senseless death and slaughter in the world around us. And maybe not even too far away where we see things happening in our own suburbs. And we are gripped in a climate of fear that says, don't go out, don't be who you want to be. Because that's what terrorism does, doesn't it? It's not the fact that it just kills people. Cars kill people, and kill far more than any terrorist. Suicide kills people far more than any terrorists. But the problem with terrorism is that it actually creates a climate of fear where we cannot live the lives that we have been called to live. We cannot live lives in abundance, which Jesus talks about. We are forced to contract, to pull in, rather than to expand and live out. In this climate, when things are this way, surely we should proclaim the reign of Christ, the commonwealth of God, the kingdom good news, in a way like we've never proclaimed it before. Not by simply going marching in rallies in Melbourne that talk about dividing our community, that tears people apart, but rather than bringing people together. The beauty of this congregation and what we stand for is we bring together many different cultures, many different people. Through the hospitality of those that were here at the beginning of this new influx, we have been able to truly become a multicultural congregation where all are accepted as children of Christ, where the term Christ as King takes on a different meaning, not one of regal pomp, but one of real humanity, where we are all together, all are loved, all are accepted, all are worthy in this kingdom. You know, I've met over the years of 30 years of ministry, lots of people who just don't think they are worthy of God's love. I assume even here, some of us may struggle with feeling worthy of God's love. But as your minister, and even though we may not feel this, I am here to proclaim that God loves each one of us. God is here for each one of us. And in our diversity, let us celebrate this. Let us use who we are as a congregation, not a big congregation by any stretch of the imagination, but ones that come from Africa, from Asia, from Australasia, from Europe. We come here together. I don't think there are any Americans. I haven't missed out any Americans, North and South. But we come here together to be the body of Christ, the people of God, and to represent that. So, Messi, last week, unfortunately, I actually prepared a sermon for you as your farewell sermon, and I haven't preached that today because I felt this is a pretty important thing to say. But when we sat there on Tuesday, after you'd come back, one of the things you talked about was the specialness of Springvale. We perhaps gilded the lily. We talked of it as some kind of heaven on earth here at Springvale. And I said, no, it's not quite that. But certainly it is heaven on earth that we represent such a diverse group of people, called from many nations. Called not because we are from some special lineage, but because simply God cares for us and loves us. You know, there's lots of words of wisdom I could give you about being a minister. You will find out most things over the next however many years you become a minister and do the ministry. And there are some things I could tell you, like, you know, people will want you to be the most spiritual person in the world, but you will be the first person that they will ring when the drains are clogged, when the roof is blown off at the church. And there will always be a battle between holding what is sacred and what is profane in life. The words that were given to me, which I would pass on to you today as well, are never underestimate the potential of evil in humanity, but never underestimate the potential of humanity to do good things. Never dismiss the potential of a congregation to do bad things, but then never dismiss your own propensity to do what is not right. We are dreadfully marred human beings in the fact that we are truly human. If you're not pleased, you can leave the church now, and I won't be offended. But the thing that pulls us together is not our race, is not our language. It is simply the fact that we belong to God. God is with us. God is here in our diversity today. Each one of us carries that which is Christ within us. Let us truly celebrate God. Let us truly celebrate Christ as the King of our church and our world.